I spent a day in the most terrorized country in the world, Burkina Faso, and what I saw changed me forever. When I first landed in Ouagadougou, the capital, the air felt heavy, not just with heat, but with the weight of fear and resilience mixed together. The airport was modest, yet full of people moving about their lives. Soldiers standing guard with rifles, families waiting for loved ones, children playing in the dust. From the very beginning, I could sense that this is a country where normal life has learned to coexist with danger. I hired a local driver named Issoufou who had lived here his whole life. His smile was warm, but his eyes revealed fatigue. As we drove through the streets, he told me about the reality here. We try to live, we try to be happy, he said, but you never know when the next attack will happen. For years now, Burkina Faso has suffered waves of violence from extremist groups who control parts of the country and attack villages, markets, even schools. Tens of thousands have been killed or forced to flee their homes. We drove past bustling markets where women carried baskets of fruits and vegetables on their heads, and young men sold roasted meat by the roadside. The city seemed alive and colorful, yet soldiers and police were everywhere. At one intersection, I saw an armored vehicle parked with its turret facing the road. A chilling reminder that peace here is fragile. In the afternoon, we visited an internally displaced persons camp on the outskirts of the city. This is where thousands of people who have fled their villages now live in tents or makeshift huts. As we walked through the camp, children ran up to me, smiling and shouting. They seemed happy to see someone new. But behind the smiles was a story of loss, families torn apart, livelihoods destroyed. I spoke with Awa, a young mother of 3, who told me her village was attacked one night. She lost her husband and barely escaped with her children. She now survives here, living on aid from charities and whatever odd jobs she can find. What struck me most was not just the hardship, but the incredible strength of these people. Despite all they've suffered, they still cook their meals, send their kids to improvised schools, pray together. At sunset, a group of boys played soccer on a dusty field as if nothing else existed outside that moment. Later that evening, as I sat with Issoufou and his friends sharing a simple dinner of rice and sauce, one of them said something I'll never forget. We live with fear every day. But if we stop living, then the terrorists have already won. That one sentence summed up everything I had witnessed in Burkina Faso, a country caught between terror and hope, violence and humanity. Spending a day here showed me the cost of conflict on ordinary people, and the quiet courage it takes just to keep going. As we drove back to my hotel under the dark African sky, I couldn't stop thinking about the faces I'd seen that day. The mother in the camp, the boys playing soccer, the soldiers standing guard. In a world that so easily forgets places like this, I knew it was my responsibility to share what I'd seen. Burkina Faso may be called the most terrorized country in the world, but it is also home to some of the most resilient people I've ever met. And they deserve to be seen, heard, and remembered. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to see another side of life here, the rural villages beyond Ouagadougou. Issoufou agreed to take me to his hometown, about 2 hours north, closer to the areas that have seen more violence. The road out of the city quickly turned into dusty, bumpy tracks lined with baobab trees and dry fields. Along the way, we passed checkpoints manned by young soldiers. They waved us through, but their eyes were alert, scanning the horizon. Here, the roads are dangerous, Issoufou warned me quietly. Sometimes they plant bombs, sometimes they stop cars to kidnap people. But if you don't go, you'll never understand what it means to live here. We arrived in his village just before midday. It was small, with clusters of mud brick homes and a well in the center where women gathered to collect water. Despite everything, the villagers greeted us warmly. Children giggled and followed me around, curious about my camera and strange accent. Isufu's mother, a kind elderly woman with a colorful headscarf, invited us into her home and offered UST, a local dish made of millet with a rich peanut sauce. As we ate, she spoke about her life here, how their crops had failed last year because of the drought, how some of their neighbors had left for the camps in the city, how she still wakes at dawn every day to sweep her yard and tend her little garden. "We have to stay," she said simply. "This is our home. Where else would we go?" After lunch, I met a local teacher who still runs a small school under a giant mango tree. He told me that many families keep their children home out of fear of attacks, but he still comes every day for the few who show up. "Education is our only hope," he said. "If we stop teaching, then the future is already gone." In the afternoon, we walked to the edge of the village where a group of men were repairing the roof of the mosque, which had been damaged by an explosion months earlier. They worked silently, their faces solemn but determined. One of them turned to me and said, "Even if they destroy it again, we will build it again. They cannot take our faith." That evening, as the sun set over the dusty horizon, the village seemed calm, even peaceful. The call to prayer echoed through the air, and families gathered around small fires for dinner. But just as we were preparing to leave, a pickup truck full of soldiers arrived. They spoke hurriedly to the village chief and then disappeared into the darkness. I later learned they were warning the villagers there had been sightings of armed men nearby. People here live with that constant uncertainty, yet they carry on anyway. On the ride back to Ouagadougou, I couldn't help but feel a deep respect for what I had seen. In a place where fear lurks around every corner, the people of Burkina Faso find strength in community, in faith, and in the simple act of refusing to give up. That day reminded me that courage doesn't always look like grand gestures or loud defiance. Sometimes it looks like a mother sweeping her yard, a teacher waiting under a tree, a man rebuilding a mosque, and a whole village daring to live, no matter the cost. The next day I decided to meet some of the people who are on the front lines of this struggle, the Volontaires pour la Défense de la Patrie, or VDPs, the civilian volunteers who have taken up arms to defend their villages. Isufu arranged for us to visit a small VDP outpost on the edge of a conflict zone south of Kaya. The drive was tense. The landscape grew more barren, the villages we passed more empty. Occasionally, we saw burnt-out huts and abandoned fields, haunting reminders of attacks that had forced people to flee. When we arrived at the outpost, a dozen men in mismatched fatigues stood outside. Most of them were farmers, herders, shopkeepers before they became fighters. Some wore rubber sandals, others had no shoes at all. Their rifles were rusty, their ammunition limited. Yet they stood tall and greeted us with nods of quiet pride. I sat down with their commander, a man named Moussa, who couldn't have been more than 30, but whose face already bore deep lines. He told me why he joined the VDP. "They came to my village at night," he said. "They killed my brother, burned our home, took my little sister. I couldn't just run away. So I stayed to fight." As he spoke, the other men sat nearby, cleaning their weapons, mending torn uniforms. Many of them had similar stories: loved ones killed, homes destroyed, nowhere left to go. Yet none of them spoke with hatred or revenge. "We don't want war," one man told me. "We just want peace, but we have to protect our people." Later, they invited me to join them on a patrol. We walked through dry brush and dusty trails, the silence broken only by the crunch of our footsteps. The men moved cautiously, scanning the trees, the hillsides, every shadow. At one point, we stopped to rest under a tree. One young volunteer, barely 18, shared his water bottle with me and asked where I came from. When I told him, he smiled faintly and said, "Tell them about us. Tell them we are still here." That moment stayed with me. These were ordinary men. Not soldiers by choice, yet they had chosen to stand their ground in defense of something larger than themselves, their families, their land, their dignity. As night fell, the volunteers lit a small fire and huddled around it, eating from a shared pot of rice. Mousa looked at me and said softly, "We don't know what tomorrow will bring, but at least today, we're still alive." And that's something. When we left, they waved goodbye, then melted back into the darkness, rifles slung over their shoulders, ready to face another uncertain night. Driving back, I realized that these quiet heroes, invisible to much of the world, embody the unbreakable spirit of Burkina Faso. They are fighting not just against terror, but for the hope that one day their children can grow up without fear. It was a sobering, humbling story to witness, one I knew I could never forget. The next morning, I wanted to see how the younger generation, the children and students, were coping in such a difficult environment. Education is one of the first casualties of conflict, yet I'd heard about a school in Wahiguya that had somehow stayed open, even as violence spread through the region. We set out early, driving north through increasingly deserted stretches of road. Along the way, Isufu pointed out a few schools that had been abandoned. Broken windows, empty playgrounds, chalkboards still covered with lessons from the day everything stopped. Many teachers left, he explained. Many children never came back. When we reached Wahiguya, the town itself seemed quiet but alive. The small school I visited stood in the middle of a dusty square. Its walls were painted in faded yellow and blue, chipped in places but standing. As we walked inside, the sound of children reciting lessons drifted through the air, a sound of hope. The principal, Madame Sidib, welcomed us warmly. She wore a simple dress and had a stack of papers in her arms, her expression equal parts exhaustion and determination. "We stay open," she told me, "because if we close, we are telling the children that fear has won. We can't let that happen." I stepped into a classroom filled with about 30 students crammed onto wooden benches. Some of them wore tattered uniforms, some wore everyday clothes, but all of them had their notebooks open, pencils moving. Across the page, I spoke to a boy named Abdoulaye who looked to be about 10 years old. He told me that his family's village had been attacked and burned, and now they live in a camp nearby. Every morning, he walks almost an hour to reach the school. "Why?" I asked him. He looked up and answered quietly, "Because I want to be a teacher one day." "Like her," he said, pointing to Madame Sidib. Later, I visited the small library where older students were gathered, reading from worn-out textbooks and practicing writing on slates. One girl, Azada, told me she dreams of becoming a nurse, so she can help her people. "Even when there are no medicines," she said, "kind words can help." It struck me how much they believed in a future, even in a place where tomorrow is never guaranteed. Every child I spoke to carried both a burden and a dream. As the day ended, the children gathered outside to sing the national anthem. Voices rose together, strong and clear, in a song about unity and courage. Standing there, listening to them, I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. In the middle of fear and loss, they still believed in their country, still believed in themselves. When it was time to leave, Madame Sidib walked me to the gate. "We don't have much here," she said, But as long as these children come, we have hope. And that is everything. Asterisk that night, as I lay in my hotel room back in Ouagadougou, I thought about those children's faces, full of dreams, full of quiet defiance against the darkness around them. Asterisk Burkina Faso's future may seem uncertain, but it is being written every day by brave, determined children in dusty classrooms, refusing to let terror steal their tomorrow. Asterisk on my final day in Burkina Faso, I wanted to understand how faith and tradition help people cope with the constant shadow of violence. Issoufou suggested we visit a small rural community outside Dori, in the Sahel region, an area hard hit by attacks but still deeply rooted in its cultural and spiritual identity. Asterisk, the drive was long and quiet. The closer we got to Dori, the emptier the roads became. Burned-out vehicles and deserted villages dotted the horizon, evidence of the terror that had swept through these lands. Yet, despite the danger, people still lived here, clinging to their homes, their land, and their way of life. Asterisk, when we arrived at the village, we were greeted by the chef du village, an elderly man named Umaru. He wore a long white robe and a traditional cap, his presence calm and dignified. He shook my hand firmly and welcomed me into his courtyard. Around us, women pounded millet while children played quietly in the dust. Asterisk Umaru told me how the community had suffered, several young men kidnapped, homes burned down, fields abandoned. But through it all, the people came together every Friday to pray at the small mosque at the edge of the village. Faith, he said, is what keeps us alive. Asterisk, he invited me to join their evening prayer and later to witness a traditional Zaka, a communal ceremony meant to cleanse the village of evil and restore balance. As the sun began to set, the men gathered at the mosque while women and children formed a circle outside, humming old songs. Asterisk inside the mosque, the prayer was powerful. Rows of men stood shoulder to shoulder, bowing and rising in unison, their voices rising in supplication. Outside, the air seemed to shimmer with a kind of sacred energy. For a moment, the fear and pain of the outside world faded, replaced by a sense of unity and resilience. Asterisk later, the Zaka began. Drummers beat out hypnotic rhythms as villagers chanted and danced, calling on their ancestors to watch over them and drive away misfortune. I watched as young and old alike moved together, their feet kicking up clouds of dust, their faces lit by firelight and determination. Asterisk afterward, Umaru sat beside me and explained, "These rituals remind us we belong to something bigger, to each other, to the land, to those who came before us. No matter what happens, we are still a people." Asterisk that night, as I left the village, I looked back at the faint glow of fires and the sound of drums echoing into the distance. In a land torn by violence and fear, these people still found ways to hold on to their identity, their traditions, their faith. Asterisk Burkina Faso, I realized, is more than just a country under siege. It is a place where courage is quiet, where hope is stubborn, and where even in the darkest of times, the human spirit refuses to be broken. Asterisk. This final story of a community holding on to its soul through prayer, ritual, and togetherness left me with a deep sense of humility. And it reminded me that no matter how much terror tries to destroy, it can never truly conquer the human will to live, to believe, and to belong. Asterisk on my last evening in Burkina Faso, I met someone who showed me yet another face of this country, one of unexpected kindness and quiet heroism. Asterisk, it was after sunset, and Issoufou and I stopped at a small roadside tea stall in Ouagadougou. Groups of young men sat on wooden benches, sipping ataya, strong, sweet tea, and chatting about football, politics, and life. The air was thick with smoke from roasted peanuts and the faint scent of dust. Asterisk, one man stood out to me. He was sitting at the far end of the stall, dressed modestly in a faded shirt and trousers, his right leg wrapped in bandages, leaning on a crutch. Something about his quiet demeanor and the way others nodded respectfully toward him drew my attention. Asterisk. Asked Isufu who he was, and he smiled faintly. "That's Suleiman," he said. "He's one of the bravest people you could meet." Asterisk. With Isufu's help, I introduced myself and asked if I could join him. Suleiman welcomed me with a warm smile and poured me a glass of tea. At first, he didn't say much, just sipped his own drink and stared into the distance. Then, slowly, his story came out. Asterisk. He had once been a schoolteacher in a small northern village, married with 2 children. But when militants attacked his village, they rounded up the men, accusing them of cooperating with the government. Suleiman stood his ground, refusing to denounce his neighbors or abandon his students. For his defiance, they beat him and left him for dead in a ditch. Asterisk. He was rescued by passing villagers and brought south to Ouagadougou, where he's been recovering ever since. His wife and children made it to a displacement camp, and he visits them whenever he can. Asterisk. Despite his injury, Suleiman now spends his days helping other displaced families settle in the city. He helps find food, organizes clothing donations, and even tutors children in makeshift classrooms. "I lost my home," he said softly, "but I didn't lose who I am. As long as I can help even one person, I will keep going." Asterisk. I asked him if he ever thought of leaving Burkina Faso, trying to find peace somewhere else. He looked at me for a long moment before shaking his head. "This is my country," he said firmly. "If everyone leaves, who will rebuild it?" Asterisk. By the time we left, the stars had come out and Suleiman was still there, pouring tea for a new group of strangers. Watching him, I realized that true bravery isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just getting up each day, carrying your pain with dignity, and choosing to help others even when you have nothing left yourself. Asterisk. As we drove away, I thought about all the people I had met here, the mothers in the camps, the children in the dusty classrooms, the volunteers on patrol, the villagers holding on to faith, and now Suleiman at his little tea stall. Asterisk. Burkina Faso may be one of the most terrorized countries in the world, but it is also one of the most inspiring, full of people who teach you what it really means to endure, to hope, and to keep moving forward, one quiet act of courage at a time. And that, more than anything, is what I'll carry with me from my time here. When I woke up in the small guest house in Ouagadougou that morning, the sky was still dark, a deep indigo streaked with faint orange at the horizon. I could already hear the quiet bustle outside, the rattle of donkey carts on the dusty street, the low murmur of vendors setting up their stalls. The air was heavy with the smell of wood smoke and damp earth, as though the city itself was exhaling before another long, hot day. Asterisk. I hadn't planned on staying this long. Originally, I came to Burkina Faso for just a few days, to document what life was really like in what the UN had called the most terrorized country in the world. But what I had found here was something I hadn't expected, stories I couldn't walk away from, and people I couldn't forget. Asterisk. That morning, Isufu, my driver and now my friend, arrived at the door right on time. He honked the horn once, and I grabbed my notebook and camera bag, slung them over my shoulder, and stepped into the already warming street. Asterisk. Today, he said as I climbed into the battered Land Cruiser, you will meet Alima. Asterisk. We drove for nearly 2 hours north toward Kongousi, passing through scrublands scattered with baobabs, past herds of goats picking through dry grass, and through villages still alive with color despite the cracked earth and faded paint. Every so often, we'd pass a checkpoint, soldiers in sand-colored uniforms waving us through after a cursory glance, their faces hard and wary, She's waiting for you, Isifu said, breaking the silence. Who is she? I asked, asterisk. You'll see. Asterisk, when we finally arrived at the small camp on the outskirts of Kongusi, the sun was high and fierce. Rows of tents stretched toward the horizon, the kind of emergency canvas shelters you see in disaster zones. Children darted between them, some barefoot, some dragging sticks in the dirt. Smoke from cooking fires hung in the air. Asterisk, we parked. And Isufu led me through the camp to one of the larger tents, its entrance shaded by a blue tarp. There, seated on a woven mat with a baby in her lap, was Alima asterisk. She stood when she saw us, a tall woman with quiet dignity and striking eyes the color of dark honey. She wore a patterned scarf draped loosely over her shoulders and a simple dress, faded from countless washes. Asterisk, you are the journalist? She asked in French, her voice calm but edged with skepticism. Asterisk, I'm here to listen. I replied softly. Asterisk, she nodded once, then gestured to the mat. Then sit. Asterisk, we sat. The baby. In her lap, her youngest son, no more than a year old, clutched her scarf and dozed against her. Around us, the sounds of the camp faded to a distant hum as she began her story. Asterisk, Alima had been a farmer's wife in a small village near Arbinda in the north. Life was hard even before the attacks. The rains were unreliable, and her husband's crops often failed, but they made do. She raised chickens, tended a tiny garden, and cared for their 3 children. Asterisk, one night, nearly a year ago, men arrived at the village. At first, no one saw them. Just the faint hum of motorcycles in the distance, then headlights cutting through the darkness. Asterisk. They came shouting, she said, her voice low, her eyes fixed somewhere far away. We thought maybe they were soldiers, but they were not. Asterisk. They rounded up the men of the village in the square and accused them of being informants for the government. Alima's husband, Ibrahim, tried to explain, to tell them that they were just farmers, that they didn't know anything about politics. Asterisk. They shot him anyway, she whispered. The baby stirred, and she soothed him absent-mindedly. After that, the men went house to house, setting fire to roofs, slashing water jars, taking anything they wanted. They threatened to take the women too, but an old imam in the village knelt in the dirt and begged for mercy. Somehow, they left without harming the women. But by dawn, the village was gone, homes smoldering, fields trampled, livestock scattered. Or dead. Asterisk, Alima and her children walked for 3 days to reach Kongusi. On the way, she passed other families, women carrying babies, old men limping along, children too tired to cry. They slept under trees, drank from muddy puddles, and shared what little food they had. Some didn't make it. Asterisk, when they finally arrived, the camp was already full. She was given a tent, a blanket, and a few kilos of millet from an aid worker. And she's been here ever since. Asterisk, she fell silent for a moment, glancing at the other women, cooking nearby at the thin plumes of smoke rising from their fires. Asterisk, do you think of going back? I asked. She shook her head. Back to what? There is nothing left. No home, no fields, no husband. Only ashes. Asterisk, yet, as we talked more, I began to see that even here, even with everything she'd lost, Alima was more than her grief. Every morning, she joined the other women in sweeping the dusty paths between the tents. She helped teach the younger children simple arithmetic. She boiled water for the sick when the clinic ran out of fuel. Asterisk, when I asked her why, she simply said, because someone must. Asterisk, later, as we walked through the camp together, children clung to her skirts, calling her Tanti Alima. An old man dozing in the shade smiled and called out blessings as she passed. In this fragile place, she had become a kind of pillar, someone others looked to when they couldn't look anywhere else. Asterisk. That evening, as the sun began to set over the camp, she stood outside her tent holding her baby and watched the horizon. Asterisk. Do you have hope? I asked. Asterisk. She didn't answer right away. Then very softly she said, hope is all we have. If we lose that, we are truly dead. Asterisk. I thanked her, promising to tell her story, to let the world know that even here, in a camp on the edge of nowhere, there was still life, still courage, still a stubborn kind of hope. Asterisk. We shook hands, and she smiled faintly, the first time. I'd seen her smile, then turned back to her children. Asterisk. As we drove away, I looked back at the camp, at the tents glowing faintly in the dusk, at Alima's silhouette standing tall against the fading sky. Asterisk. And I thought, maybe hope really is enough. Asterisk. The next morning, I asked Isufu to take me further north, deeper into the Sahel, closer to the places people only spoke of in whispers. I wanted to understand what it was like not just to live in the camps, but to be in flight, caught in the middle of it all, moving because you have no choice. Asterisk. We left Ouagadougou before dawn. The air was cooler in the early hours, almost pleasant, though we knew it wouldn't last. As the sun rose, the road turned to dust, then gravel, then barely a track at all. Every so often we'd pass armed patrols, some military, some VDP civilian volunteers, some just men with rifles and wary eyes. Asterisk. By mid-morning, we reached a cluster of trees where a group of families had stopped to rest, part of the endless wave of displaced people moving southward. They had walked all night and planned to continue as soon as the heat eased. Asterisk. There were maybe 30 of them in total, their belongings carried in bundles, on donkeys, on their own backs. Pots, buckets, clothes, everything they owned now reduced to what they could carry. Children clung to their mothers, eyes wide and hollow with exhaustion. That's where I met a young man named Hamidou. He stood at the edge of the group, his shirt soaked through with sweat and dust streaking his face. His wife, Aminata, sat in the shade holding their baby daughter, rocking her gently even as she slept. Asterisk. When I introduced myself, Hamidou hesitated at first. Then he nodded toward a fallen log and we sat. Asterisk. His story tumbled out quickly, as though he had been waiting for someone, anyone, to hear it. Asterisk. Hamidou had been a cattle herder near Djibo in the north. His family had lived there for generations. For years, the conflict had been creeping closer, but their village had somehow been spared. Until last week, asterisk. It was market day. He was in town selling milk when the attackers arrived. Armed, masked, shouting, shooting into the air. They went straight to the chief's house and killed him in front of everyone. Then they told the crowd that anyone who refused to join them would die. Asterisk. Hamidou ran. He didn't even have time to collect his herd. He ran all the way back to his hamlet, gathered Aminata, their baby, and his younger brother, and they set off south that same night. Asterisk. Now, after 4 days of walking, they were still more than 100 kilometers from safety. Asterisk. He gestured to the group resting nearby. Some have nothing left, he said. Some lost their children in the chaos. Some are too sick to walk. But we keep going, because if we stop, we are finished. Asterisk. As we spoke, his brother, a boy of about 12, returned with a small bag of water and handed it to him. Hamidou thanked him quietly and handed it to Aminata first, who poured a little into the baby's mouth before taking a sip herself. Asterisk. I watched them for a long moment, this small, fragile family clinging to each other in the middle of the unforgiving Sahel. Asterisk. In the afternoon, the group began to move again. The sun was a blazing disk overhead, and the air shimmered with heat. I walked alongside them for a while, my camera slung around my neck but forgotten, my notebook left behind in the car. Asterisk. The children were the ones who broke the silence. One of them, a boy no older than 6, began singing softly, and soon the others joined in. It was a lullaby, one their mothers must have sung to them at night. Somehow, even here, even now, it seemed to soothe everyone's frayed nerves. Hamado's brother walked ahead, scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. He carried a stick as though it were a rifle. His shoulders were squared, his chin held high.